It was November 1944. Rain tapped endlessly against the tin roof of a temporary barracks near Cherbourg, one of dozens the British Army had turned into interrogation centers after the liberation of France. Inside, a single light bulb swayed above a wooden table. On one side sat Lieutenant Harold Dixon, an officer from the Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Center, flipping through a thin file. Across from him, Oberleutnant Karl Fuchs, a captured German engineer, stared blankly at his own trembling hands. The war had stripped away his confidence, the iron discipline of the Wehrmacht replaced now by fatigue and quiet fear. Outside, the low rumble of transport trucks echoed across the muddy compound as more prisoners arrived from the front. Fuchs had been silent for hours, answering only with short, guarded replies. Then suddenly, his voice broke the air, low, uncertain, but clear. "There is something you should know," he said. Dixon paused, pen hovering above his notebook. What followed would ripple far beyond that dimly lit room, leading Allied forces straight to a bunker no reconnaissance aircraft had ever found. By late 1944, the Second World War had entered its final and most desperate phase. The German Reich, once stretching from the Atlantic to the outskirts of Moscow, was shrinking by the week. Allied armies pressed from the west, Soviet divisions advanced from the east, and the Luftwaffe, once feared across Europe, was a shadow of its former self. Yet beneath the crumbling surface, the Third Reich remained dangerous. Every hill, every forest, every stone village could conceal resistance. The German High Command, realizing conventional defenses were failing, began relying on hidden bunkers, underground factories, and concealed command posts. The intention was simple: to preserve what little remained of the war machine and, if possible, strike back through new wonder weapons. To Allied commanders, this posed a nightmare. Aerial reconnaissance could map the terrain, but not the subterranean world beneath it. The Allies had learned this lesson the hard way in northern France. In the summer of 1944, before the breakout from Normandy, they had discovered several heavily camouflaged V-weapon sites, too late to prevent attacks on London and Antwerp. Intelligence gaps cost lives. That failure reshaped Allied priorities. By autumn, entire sections of British and American intelligence were focused on one question: where was Germany hiding its remaining war potential? Teams from the Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Center, CSDIC, the U.S. Army's Military Intelligence Service, MISX, and the Office of Strategic Services, AOSS, worked tirelessly to answer it. They sifted through captured documents, aerial photos, intercepted signals, and, increasingly, the minds of prisoners. Interrogation had become one of the Allies' most valuable weapons, but it was not the brutal, cinematic process often imagined later. The British approach, honed through experience, relied on psychology and patience. Their motto was quiet persistence. Captured men were not beaten. They were disoriented, exhausted, and gently convinced that honesty would serve them better than silence. Each prisoner represented a potential breakthrough. Thousands passed through temporary camps. Some truck drivers, others mechanics or engineers. Many spoke little. Some talked endlessly about trivial matters, and a rare few provided information that changed the course of operations. By November, Allied forces had crossed into Belgium and the Netherlands, approaching the fortified Siegfried Line, the final barrier before Germany itself. The Ardennes region, dense with forests and natural cover, hid countless installations. Reports described underground communication centers, fuel depots, even rumored laboratories for rocket development. But despite massive efforts, intelligence remained incomplete. Reconnaissance photographs revealed shadows in the hills, possible entrances, strange tracks, faint traces of smoke, but little that could be confirmed. Allied ground units advancing toward the Rhine were haunted by the possibility of ambushes from unseen strongholds. Behind these fears lay memory. Earlier in the war, near Pas-de-Calais and Peenemünde, German engineers had constructed vast bunkers invisible to aerial eyes, shelters capable of withstanding direct bombing. Some served as launch sites for V-2 rockets, others as command posts shielded by reinforced concrete and terrain. The British intelligence service suspected that similar sites still existed farther east, hidden among the ruins of occupied France and Western Germany. Yet they had no coordinates, no maps, only fragments of prisoner chatter and intercepted messages hinting at relocation points or fortified depots. That was the world into which Lieutenant Harold Dixon and his colleagues operated. Men like Dixon, trained in the art of interrogation, were not frontline soldiers but detectives in uniform. They pieced together the war's invisible layer, the secrets behind the visible battles. When Oberleutnant Karl Fuchs was captured near Aachen, a retreating engineer from a logistics unit, he appeared ordinary, even unimportant. His uniform bore no medals, his file was thin. To the staff at the Cherbourg Center, he was just one more name among thousands. But in that late November storm, as the interrogation began, the broader war outside was in motion. Allied troops prepared for a winter offensive that would soon become the Battle of the Bulge, unaware that beneath their very feet, networks of bunkers and tunnels still pulsed with German command activity. And somewhere in those maps of uncertainty lay the bunker that Fuchs would soon reveal. For most Allied soldiers, the war was fought in mud, snow, and fire. But for a small, quiet branch of the military, victory depended not on bullets, but on words. These were the men and women of the intelligence corps, interrogators, translators, psychologists, whose battleground lay behind locked doors and under dim lights. By 1944, the British CSDIC and the American MI6 had refined the science of interrogation to a disciplined craft. Their goal was not to break prisoners, but to open them. Every conversation, gesture, and hesitation was a potential clue. The process began the moment a prisoner arrived. Captured soldiers were often exhausted, disoriented, and stripped of rank insignia to prevent recognition. They were given food, dry clothes, and the illusion of comfort, all calculated to lower defenses. In some camps, prisoners heard BBC radio in the background, or saw guards reading English newspapers, subtle reminders that the war was ending, and that resistance was futile. In the early stages, interrogators avoided confrontation. They asked about harmless subjects, weather, family, conditions at the front. The questions were designed to build familiarity. It was in these casual exchanges that crucial fragments often slipped through. A mention of a town, a factory, a supply route. Each piece, when cross-referenced, filled another blank on the Allies' intelligence map. Some prisoners boasted, eager to prove technical knowledge. Others lied, and the trained interrogators could sense it instantly. The best among them, like Lieutenant Harold Dixon, had an instinct for silence. They would let a prisoner talk himself into contradiction, then quietly reveal the inconsistency. The goal was not humiliation, but uncertainty. To make the prisoner doubt his ability to conceal the truth. The Allies had learned much from earlier successes. In 1943, British intelligence had uncovered German submarine tactics after a series of careful interrogations in Trent Park, a country house turned into a listening post. There, microphones were hidden in the walls. Conversations between captured officers were recorded and analyzed. From this method, the Allies learned about new weapons, troop morale, and the shifting faith within the Wehrmacht. By 1944, the same principles were applied across Europe. Interrogation centers like CSDIC West in France processed thousands of prisoners monthly. Reports from these centers flowed upward to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Chef Fins, where analysts pieced together operational intelligence. The war of information had become as critical as the one of movement. Field commanders demanded constant updates. Where were German fuel reserves hidden? How were their artillery lines supplied? Were there new defensive installations in the Siegfried Line? Each time a German officer or engineer was captured, the same questions surfaced. And yet, despite all efforts, the Allies still lacked a clear picture of certain underground networks believed to exist between Aachen, Bonn, and the Eifel Mountains. Rumors spoke of a fortified structure, possibly used as a command bunker or weapons cache, deep beneath the hills. One that even Allied aerial reconnaissance couldn't find. In November, the weather turned harsh. The skies over northern France filled with low clouds, grounding reconnaissance aircraft. Visibility was minimal, and radio intercepts revealed only fragments of German communication. For the intelligence teams, the flow of information slowed to a trickle, until one night, a small convoy of prisoners arrived from the front lines near Aachen. Among them was Oberleutnant Karl Fuchs. His capture report listed him as an engineering officer attached to a field logistics division. Nothing remarkable, but the subtle details of his belongings, a hand-drawn map, a set of coded maintenance notes, caught the attention of the analysts. He was sent to Cherbourg for interrogation. The center's logbook records his arrival. Fuchs Karl. Rank, Oberleutnant. Captured 14th of November. Cooperative, undetermined. For days, he said little. He asked for cigarettes, wrote short answers, and maintained the polite detachment of a professional soldier. Yet behind that restraint was the fatigue of a man who had seen his world collapsing. Reports from other prisoners in his unit hinted that he had been stationed near a communications depot that was evacuated just before Allied shelling. When Dixon entered the room that stormy evening, he did not expect anything extraordinary. Another session, another cautious officer. But what neither man knew was that the smallest detail Fuchs was about to reveal, almost by accident, would uncover one of the last German command bunkers still active in Western Europe. St. Oberleutnant Karl Fuchs was 33 years old when he was captured. Born in Dortmund, he had studied civil engineering before being drafted into the Wehrmacht. Like many German officers of his class, he was a technician first, a soldier second. His loyalty was to precision, to blueprints and measurements, not ideology. By 1944, that distinction had become meaningless. The war demanded that engineers build fortifications one week and destroy bridges the next. Fuchs had spent most of the conflict designing reinforced communication bunkers for field headquarters, concrete labyrinths hidden under forests or small villages. When his unit was overrun near Aachen, he carried with him technical notes and sketches intended for evacuation eastward. Captured and interrogated, he found himself in a world without certainty. The Reich was crumbling. The Allied bombers ruled the sky, and news from home spoke only of ruins. To men like him, the war no longer looked heroic. It looked absurd. Interrogators at CSDIC were trained to sense when that disillusionment began to outweigh fear. Dixon saw it in Fuchs's eyes. That faint recognition that honesty, at least once, might bring peace. Fuchs's confession was not born of betrayal, but exhaustion. He spoke of a communications bunker near the Eifel Ridge, a complex his team had constructed in 1943 under direct orders from the German High Command. It was, he said, a place built to survive the end of the war. He hesitated, uncertain whether to continue. Then slowly, the words emerged, and with them, a map that would soon redraw part of the Allies' understanding of Germany's Western defenses. For the Allies, November 1944 was a month of frustration. The great summer offensives had carried their armies across France and Belgium, but momentum was fading. Supply lines stretched thin, fuel shortages grew critical, and winter rains turned roads into rivers of mud. High command needed to know where German forces were regrouping, especially command centers coordinating resistance across the Western Front. Any undiscovered bunker could serve as a nerve center for counterattacks or house stockpiles of ammunition and radio equipment. In military intelligence reports, underground facility was a phrase that triggered immediate attention. Experience had taught the Allies that Germany's strength often hid below ground. Submarine pens in Brest, U-boat shelters in Saint-Nazaire, the immense V-weapon bunkers at Mimoyek and La Coupole. These structures had cost months of bombing and thousands of tons of explosives to neutralize. So when Fuchs quietly mentioned a communications site carved into the hills near Monschau, less than 30 kilometers from the front line, it aligned with every fear Allied analysts carried. If true, such a bunker could serve as a fallback command post. Or worse, as part of a secret network linking to Berlin. The intelligence officers immediately cross-checked his words against captured documents and reconnaissance images. On a faded aerial photo, a peculiar clearing near the forest's edge drew their eyes. A set of faint lines, like tire tracks, disappeared into shadow. For months, those marks had meant nothing. Now they did. Dixon's report, marked urgent, field verification required, traveled up the chain within hours. The note beside it read, possible high-value site indicated by POW technical officer. Recommends reconnaissance patrol. For the Allies, the tactical significance was immense. Locating one undetected bunker could reveal not only a command post, but entire networks of hidden routes, supply depots, and defensive plans. A single confession had the potential to open a corridor of understanding. The bunker Fuchs described was no ordinary shelter, built under direct supervision of organization. Taught, the same engineering corps that constructed the Atlantic Wall, it represented the height of German wartime engineering. He recalled reinforced concrete walls nearly 3 meters thick, disguised entrances under layers of soil, and ventilation shafts hidden among the trees. Power was supplied by underground diesel generators. The communication hub, according to him, used an advanced relay system connected by buried cables to field networks across western Germany. In essence, it was a self-contained nerve center, capable of coordinating troop movements even under heavy bombardment. For Allied planners, this confirmed what many had suspected, that Germany's command structure had prepared for total isolation. The technological sophistication of such bunkers was remarkable for its time. Germany had long mastered the art of concealment through engineering. The entire Western Front was dotted with Führerhauptquartiere, Führer headquarters, from which Hitler and his staff issued orders. But smaller, decentralized bunkers like the one Fuchs described were even more difficult to detect. They required minimal manpower, relied on efficient communication systems, and were built deep enough to withstand near-direct hits from 500-pound bombs. This revelation had both strategic and psychological weight. If the Allies could locate and neutralize the site, it would dismantle a key node of German resistance. If they couldn't, it might enable enemy commanders to coordinate surprise attacks, the very fear that, weeks later, would materialize during the Battle of the Bulge. The intelligence officers who read Fuchs's testimony understood the stakes immediately. The bunker was not just a structure, it was a symbol of Germany's ability to hide, endure, and strike back even in collapse. And for Dixon, the man who recorded those words in the damp room at Cherbourg, the confession marked a turning point. The next step was verification, to prove that Fuchs's memory aligned with reality. That task would soon fall to reconnaissance units, combing the forests of the Eifel Ridge. What they found there would confirm that one man's words could expose what radar, aircraft, and armies had all missed. When Lieutenant Dixon's report reached the intelligence section of the First Allied Army, it was reviewed with the habitual caution that governed every wartime decision. Intelligence was a currency of trust, and every word had to be verified before command dared to spend it. Major Edward Barker, head of field intelligence in the sector, received the file on his desk on the morning of 22nd November 1944. He had seen dozens of such reports, many promising, most proving false. Prisoners often exaggerated or confused locations, memories blurred under bombardment. But something about Fuchs's statement stood out: his technical accuracy, the way he described construction materials, the orientation of air shafts, the slope of the access road, all matched known engineering patterns of organization-taught sites. And more importantly, his demeanor, as reported by Dixon, was calm and consistent. Barker ordered a small team from the Royal Engineers and U.S. Reconnaissance Detachment to investigate the region south of Monschau. Their mission was simple: verify, photograph, and, if confirmed, map the coordinates for a later strike. For days, aircraft flew over the designated area. The weather was poor, visibility near zero. Yet the aerial photos revealed faint geometric patterns in the forest, unnatural alignments. Then on 28th November, a reconnaissance patrol on the ground discovered what the camera could not: a narrow concrete slit, half buried under moss and snow. Barker's team reported signs of recent human activity, vehicle tracks leading to concealed entrance, possible ventilation system. Within hours, the site was classified as active. Fuchs's information had proven accurate. The intelligence chain reacted instantly, a rare moment when the invisible machinery of analysis, command, and field verification clicked into perfect sequence. For the officers who handled it, the discovery symbolized the essence of wartime leadership: the ability to recognize truth when it arrived quietly, without fanfare, in the weary words of a prisoner. From the German side, such secrecy was not an accident of desperation, but the result of long planning. Since 1942, as Allied bombing intensified, Germany's engineers had begun moving vital operations underground. The Eifel region, with its rugged hills and dense forests, offered natural concealment. Here, Organization Taut supervised the construction of tunnels and reinforced chambers originally intended for communication relays and fuel storage. As the tide of war turned, these facilities were repurposed, transformed into command bunkers, ammunition stores, and fallback headquarters. Secrecy was maintained through compartmentalization. Local villagers were often told that the projects were civil defense shelters. Construction workers were rotated between sites to prevent familiarity. Only a handful of officers knew the full network's layout. To Allied reconnaissance, the terrain appeared ordinary. The entrances were camouflaged beneath layers of soil, vegetation, and false farm structures. Ventilation chimneys were disguised as tree stumps. Even thermal detection, primitive at the time, revealed nothing through the thick forest canopy. Inside, the bunkers were feats of pragmatic genius, austere, functional, efficient. Steel blast doors sealed corridors lined with communication cables. Generator rooms hummed quietly in the dark. In the war's final months, such places became not just shelters, but symbols of endurance, physical proof that Germany still had the means to resist. Fuchs's knowledge came from that world. The technical elite serving an ideology they did not always believe in, but were bound to obey. Many of his colleagues would never surrender. They remained underground until the very end, their positions collapsing only when cut off from supplies. The discovery of one bunker, then, was more than a tactical win for the Allies. It was an insight into the enemy's mind, into the obsession with concealment, and the illusion of invincibility that still animated the Reich even as its cities burned. Wartime morality seldom offers clarity. Between loyalty and survival lies a shadow that every soldier must cross. For Karl Fuchs, that shadow took the shape of a confession, a choice between silence that meant nothing and honesty that might mean everything. Historians later debated whether his revelation was born of conscience or despair. The truth may lie somewhere between. He had served a nation that promised order and delivered ruin. He had built defenses to protect his homeland, only to see them turned into prisons for the men who fought beneath them. When he finally spoke in the Cherbourg interrogation room, it was not with defiance, but relief. His words, recorded in Dixon's report, were simple. "If you are looking for their main center, it is under the hills near Monschau." In that moment, the boundaries between enemy and ally blurred. The human instinct to tell the truth, even to those you once called adversaries, emerged from the rubble of ideology. For the Allied officers, too, the moral question lingered. Every confession extracted from a prisoner carried weight. Was it right to use it? To act upon it knowing that honesty once spoken could lead to destruction for those left behind? Yet, in the calculus of war, hesitation cost lives. The discovery of the bunker saved countless Allied soldiers from potential ambushes, but it also sealed the fate of the German unit stationed within. War rarely rewards virtue cleanly. In the dim archives of intelligence history, Fuchs's file remains one of many, a testament to how truth, once spoken, can serve victory and tragedy alike. And as December approached, the Allies prepared to act on that truth, turning a whispered confession into a full-scale operation that would test the limits of both courage and deception. Dawn broke pale and brittle over the Eifel hills. A thin mist clung to the trees, muting the rumble of distant artillery. To the untrained eye, the forest looked untouched by war. Silent, almost serene. But beneath its calm surface, something stirred. A small Allied convoy, mostly jeeps and scout carriers, crawled up a narrow dirt road southeast of Monschau. Leading the patrol was Captain Thomas Rawlins of the Royal Engineers, an officer accustomed to finding what others overlooked. Beside him sat an American intelligence liaison, Lieutenant Henry Miles, carrying the coded copy of Dixon's interrogation transcript. They had one objective: confirm the existence of the underground installation described by Fuchs. The operation, classified as a forward technical reconnaissance, involved 12 men, engineers, sappers, and a demolitions expert. Their orders were explicit: observe, do not engage, and document. The journey began before dawn, on 30th of November, 1944. Cold rain fell intermittently, turning the forest floor into a mire. The men moved cautiously, stopping often to check bearings and compare the terrain to aerial photographs. Nothing, at first, matched the coordinates. Hills rose and fell in endless repetition, each ridge hiding another. By mid-morning, they reached a clearing where a cluster of burned trees formed a circle of black stumps. One of the engineers noticed faint lines cut into the soil, tire marks, partially filled with water. They followed them uphill until the path ended abruptly against what appeared to be a natural embankment. It was there that Rawlins saw it, a narrow concrete edge protruding beneath tangled roots. He brushed away dirt and leaves. The shape of a doorway emerged, sealed by a steel plate camouflaged with mud and moss. The team fell silent. Miles crouched beside it, studying the surface. No signs of demolition or shell damage. It was intact. A small vent shaft rose nearby, disguised under a log. Fuchs's description matched perfectly. Rawlins ordered 2 men to set up a field telephone and contact headquarters. The message transmitted back to the intelligence command post at Eupen was short and precise. Bunker entrance located. Coordinates grid 292-485. Appears active. Awaiting further instruction. Within an hour, the reply arrived. Proceed with controlled entry if feasible. Photograph interior. Priority 1. The team prepared cautiously. Explosives were placed near the hinges, and the men took cover. A muffled blast echoed through the forest. When the smoke cleared, the steel door hung open. Inside, a stairwell descended into darkness. Rawlins switched on his flashlight. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of diesel and concrete. Steps led down nearly 20 feet before opening into a corridor lined with pipes and electrical cables. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of a generator somewhere below. The men advanced slowly, weapons ready. In the second chamber, they found rows of desks, radio equipment, and telephone switchboards, all operational but abandoned. Papers littered the floor, some marked with the insignia of the Wehrmacht's Army Group B, the formation then defending the Western Front under Field Marshal model. Miles leafed through one of the documents and froze. The date on the top corner read November 28, 1944. Only 2 days earlier. Whoever had occupied the bunker had left in a hurry. Further inside, they discovered bunks, food stores, and sealed fuel drums. The layout corresponded exactly to Fuchs's account. Every corridor, every ventilation shaft, even the emergency exit concealed behind a false wall. Then came the most significant find. A communication logbook containing outgoing message codes referencing Operation Herbstnebel, the German code name for the upcoming Ardennes offensive. At that time, Allied command still believed the German army was incapable of launching a major counterattack. The discovery shattered that assumption. Rawlins ordered the documents and signal equipment to be collected immediately. The bunker was photographed extensively, its map coordinates recorded for further analysis. By dusk, the team withdrew, leaving demolition charges at key structural points. The explosions collapsed the main access tunnel, sealing the site. Back at headquarters, the intelligence summary carried one striking line. Information provided by POW Oberleutnant Fuchs, confirmed. Facility operational until 28/0/44. Documents recovered indicate preparation for offensive operations in Ardennes sector. It was a revelation that electrified Allied intelligence. For weeks, signals intercepts and aerial reports had failed to detect any coherent German buildup in the Ardennes. Now, hidden beneath the forest, lay evidence that a coordinated operation was imminent. Within 24 hours, copies of the findings were dispatched to Schaeff in Versailles, where analysts debated the implications. Some dismissed it as outdated intelligence, perhaps remnants of a plan already abandoned. Others, including British intelligence officer Colonel David Stokes, urged immediate precaution. If this site was part of a network, he warned, it means others exist still connected, and they are preparing something large. But in the fog of late 1944, amid hundreds of conflicting reports, the warning blurred into the noise of war. The Allies noted it, archived it, and moved on to other fronts. And yet, weeks later, when German forces launched their surprise Ardennes counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge, the truth of that bunker's seat, communications log would echo through every frozen forest of Belgium. Night cloaked the Eifel, hills in a silence broken only by the occasional groan of artillery far to the east. Inside a requisitioned farmhouse near Eupen, Lieutenant Dixon, the same man who had first heard Karl Fuchs's trembling confession, now stood over a table littered with reconnaissance photos. Each image, freshly developed, captured fragments of what his men had found. The bunker's entrance, the generator room, the coded documents sealed in wax. A British major from the Intelligence Corps, James Redford, entered, removing his gloves. "Confirmation from London just came in," he said quietly. "They want everything translated and indexed by morning. G2 wants to know if this was a one-off or part of something bigger." Dixon exhaled, rubbing his temples. "It's bigger," he said. Fuchs spoke of relay points. "If this bunker transmitted daily to Koblenz, there's a network somewhere east." The two men exchanged a grim glance. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, a reminder that winter was closing in fast. Over the following days, the recovered files were pored over by analysts from both British and American intelligence. Among the documents, Several schematic drawings bore the insignia HVPL. Here is Versuchsplan, the Army's experimental planning department. They showed underground relay stations arranged in a chain stretching from Aachen to Prüm, each linked by high-frequency cable. The implication was staggering. The Germans had built a redundant command communication system hidden beneath the forest floor, invisible to reconnaissance aircraft and resistant to bombing. It was an unseen nervous system running below the Western Front. The findings were forwarded to Chef's G2 division, where they were catalogued under File 2374A, Enemy Underground Facilities, Western Sector. Yet the timing worked against them. Allied attention had already shifted toward reinforcing the Roer River line and preparing for the push into the Ruhr. The discovery, while alarming, was filed as non-urgent, pending further corroboration. Still, for Dixon and Rawlins, it refused to rest. Both officers pressed for a follow-up mission to determine whether the network extended toward the Ardennes, a region that, by all estimates, was considered quiet. Their persistence paid off. On December 10, 1944, a mixed British-American reconnaissance unit, Operation Lantern, was authorized. Their task: locate and destroy any secondary installations linked to the Monschau bunker. The patrol, led once again by Captain Rawlins, set out through the Schnee Eifel under a curtain of snow. The men carried lightweight explosives, portable transmitters, and cameras. As they advanced eastward, they encountered multiple sites bearing signs of recent abandonment. Fresh tracks, disguised cable trenches, and hastily covered hatches. In one ravine, they found a collapsed shaft with twisted steel ladders and frozen water pooled at the base. Miles climbed halfway down, brushing aside debris, revealing telephone wire spools stamped Reichspost, Trier. It was irrefutable proof of a wider system. Before they could investigate further, a distant rumble grew. Engines, dozens of them, echoing through the valley. The men froze. Through the trees, they glimpsed movement. Columns of German armored vehicles moving west, headlights covered, tracks muffled by snow. Rawlins's voice broke the silence. "Good God, they're moving a whole division." The team retreated quickly, radioing an emergency message back to HQ. It was the first Allied field sighting of the German buildup for the Ardennes offensive, though, tragically, higher command dismissed it as an isolated redeployment by December 16th. The truth detonated like a storm. At dawn, German artillery thundered across the front. Panzer columns surged from the forests of Eifel and Luxembourg, smashing into American lines. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. In Eupen, chaos erupted as reports flooded in: broken units, captured towns, collapsing communication lines. Amid the confusion, Dixon and Redford reviewed their earlier intelligence with grim realization. The bunker near Monschau had not been a relic. It had been an operational command post tied directly to the prelude of this offensive. On the third day of the battle, when the front wavered dangerously near St. Vith, Allied command ordered all known underground facilities in the region to be neutralized to prevent German reoccupation. Rawlins's engineering detachment was redeployed once more. Under freezing sleet and enemy shell fire, they returned to the original site. The entrance was half-collapsed, but still intact. Using shaped charges, they destroyed the remaining chambers, ensuring no further use. The final detonation echoed through the forest like the closing of a long-buried secret. When the smoke cleared, the men stood silently. Rawlins muttered, "This should have been stopped weeks ago." Dixon, now posted to forward intelligence, received the report the next morning. In his logbook, he wrote a single line: "Information dismissed became prophecy." After the war, Allied post-war intelligence, specifically the British Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, confirmed that the Monschau bunker had been part of a larger communications chain supporting Army Group B's logistical and operational planning. Documents recovered in early 1945 revealed that Fuchs's testimony had indeed exposed the only link that could have provided early warning of the Ardennes attack. But by then, the cost was already written across the snows of Belgium. Winter 1945. The Ardennes forests were quiet again, their trees shattered, the snow layered with the wreckage of burned-out tanks. For weeks, engineers worked through the cold, clearing roads and counting the cost. The Allied victory in the Battle of the Bulge came at a heavy price. More than 80,000 American casualties and tens of thousands more Germans killed or captured. Amid the ruins, intelligence officers combed through captured documents and equipment left behind in bunkers and field command posts. It was here, among damp files and damaged radios, that the story of Karl Fuchs resurfaced. A single folder, marked CSD case 1421F, was found cross-referenced with a series of Allied debriefs labeled Monschau Installation. When analysts compared Fuchs's original statements with the newly captured materials, the alignment was undeniable. His account, once viewed as minor, had precisely matched the layout of the German underground relay system. Had it been prioritized sooner, Allied command might have detected the buildup that preceded the Ardennes offensive. The revelation triggered quiet frustration inside Schaef's G2 division. Reports from January 1945 contain terse internal memos acknowledging errors of judgment in threat assessment and recommending procedural reforms for field intelligence handling. One officer wrote bluntly, "We listened, but not soon enough." The tragedy was not one of ignorance, but of timing. In a war where thousands of reports crossed desks daily, even vital intelligence could be lost beneath the flood. The confession of one tired prisoner had momentarily illuminated a secret network, only to be drowned out by the noise of larger operations. Fuchs himself remained in Allied custody. After his cooperation, he was transferred to Trent Park in Britain, where captured German officers were housed for extended debriefing. There, conversations were discreetly recorded as part of the British M-Room operation. Fuchs, unaware of the microphones hidden behind the walls, spoke freely to fellow officers about his division's work in underground logistics. In those transcripts, later declassified in the 1990s, his tone is weary, reflective. He describes his actions not as betrayal, but as inevitability. When the system falls, you cling to truth because it's the only thing left standing. The confession that had started as a moment of exhaustion had now become part of the intelligence tapestry that helped end the war. His details about underground construction methods later guided post-war investigations into Nazi fortifications and tunnel networks across the Rhine. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence underwent a transformation. The experience exposed how information, no matter how precise, could fail if misjudged or poorly distributed. The lesson led to the creation of more centralized intelligence coordination mechanisms in the final months of the war. In early 1945, a directive from General Eisenhower's headquarters ordered that all field interrogation results be transmitted through a unified cross-service reporting structure. This became a prototype for post-war agencies like MI6's Joint Intelligence Committee and the U.S. Strategic Intelligence Branch, the precursors to the modern CIA and NATO intelligence frameworks. As Germany's defenses collapsed, Allied units began unearthing dozens of similar bunkers, some incomplete, others still operational, stretching through the Eifel and Hunsrück regions. Each discovery echoed the same story: elaborate underground systems designed for survival in defeat. Engineers found miles of copper cable, coded message machines, and sealed steel doors buried under meters of reinforced concrete. For many intelligence veterans, the irony was bitter. The war that had begun with bold attacks and open battlefields had ended in silence, underground, in the shadow of a dying regime. In February 1945, Lieutenant Harold Dixon filed his final field report before being reassigned. His last entry was simple. The confession that opened a door may have saved lives, too late for those already fallen, but enough to remind us that no word is ever small. The Allies would carry that philosophy into the peace that followed, a peace built not on victory alone, but on understanding. And yet, as Reconstruction began and Europe tried to heal, the question lingered. What becomes of those whose truth came too late? The answer lay partly in what happened to Karl Fuchs himself. Spring came slowly to Britain in 1945. The war in Europe was ending, and prisoners of war, engineers, officers, and conscripts alike were being sorted, interrogated one final time, and repatriated. Among them was Oberleutnant Karl Fuchs, now 36, thinner, grayer, and carrying the quiet detachment of a man who had survived both sides of war. At Trent Park, the debriefings softened. Interrogators shifted from extraction to analysis, gathering lessons for post-war reconstruction. The files on Fuchs were marked cooperative, technically proficient, non-ideological. He answered every question on logistics, communications, and engineering, often providing diagrams of tunnel layouts and ventilation systems used in German bunkers. By the time he was transferred to the British Control Commission in Germany in 1946, he was no longer a prisoner, but a resource. He helped Allied engineers locate buried munitions depots and dismantle unexploded bunkers in the Ruhr Valley, ironically aiding in the unmaking of the very systems he once designed. Little else was recorded about him. Some documents suggest he later worked as a civil engineer in the newly rebuilt West Germany, specializing in underground utilities, a civilian echo of his wartime expertise. Others indicate he was interviewed in 1953 by the Bundesarchive's Military History section about fortification architecture. After that, the record falls silent. For decades, the file labeled CS Dix, Sachs 14 Frauen and 10 Bauden 10 T1F remained sealed under wartime classification. Only in the 1980s, when British intelligence began declassifying its interrogation archives, did historians encounter the case again. Inside were transcripts, hand-drawn maps, and the understated note from Lieutenant Dixon. Confession credible. Cross-check recommended. Researchers tracing the origins of the Ardennes deception soon realized the significance. The hidden bunker Fuchs had described wasn't a legend or exaggeration. It had been real, and its existence hinted that the Wehrmacht had prepared for a long war even as its armies retreated. When historians from the Imperial War Museum examined the aerial photographs from 1944-45, they found faint ground disturbances matching the described bunker coordinates near Monschau. Field surveys in the 1990s confirmed remnants of reinforced concrete shafts buried under forest growth. The site was partially excavated in 2002 by German archaeologists, revealing fragments of telecommunication cable and steel. Ventilation ducts. It was a quiet validation of a story once dismissed. The files also revealed something else, a glimpse into the human side of intelligence work. Alongside the interrogation notes was a letter, dated December 1944, written by Dixon but never sent. He said it without intent, as if unburdening himself of a memory too heavy to carry. I've seen many men lie, but rarely one tell the truth so plainly. That truth, simple, uncalculated, had rippled through the war's final chapters in ways none could predict. Fuchs's honest confession had not only led to the uncovering of a bunker, but had exposed the limits of human attention amid chaos. By the time historians pieced together the entire story, most of the people involved were gone. Lieutenant Harold Dixon retired in 1963 and died a decade later. His wartime papers, preserved by his family, contained detailed sketches of interrogation rooms, notes on prisoner behavior, and reflections on moral responsibility. In one of his journals, he wrote, "Every war depends on silence and the moment it breaks. One man's words can weigh more than battalions." Today, the Monschau bunker site stands overgrown, marked only by a discreet plaque installed by local historians. Few visitors realize its connection to the intelligence battles of 1944, and yet, in archives and academic journals, the story of Oberleutnant Karl Fuchs endures as a quiet reminder that truth in war does not always roar. Sometimes, it whispers through the walls of an interrogation room and takes decades to be heard. History rarely moves because of grand speeches or heroic charges. More often, it turns quietly, on a single word, a brief hesitation, a truth spoken in a moment when no one was listening. Karl Fuchs's confession was not recorded in the headlines of 1944. It did not change the outcome of the war. The Ardennes still burned, and thousands still fell beneath the snow. But hidden inside that small act of honesty was something larger, the fragile recognition that even in war, truth holds its own power, indifferent to uniforms or flags. In the long shadow of the 20th century, intelligence became the new frontier of conflict. Nations learned that wars could be won not only on battlefields, but in minds, in rooms where words replaced weapons. The lessons born from those wartime interrogations shaped how democracies would gather, share, and guard information for generations. Yet, behind the systems and the strategies remains a simple, human reality. That understanding begins when someone chooses to speak, and someone else chooses to believe. Fuchs's words, uttered across a wooden table under the dim light of a captured port, outlived the empire that sent him to war. They passed through reports, archives, and forgotten files until they surfaced decades later. A whisper carried through history's noise. For those who study war, it is a reminder that truth often lies buried not under ruins, but under indifference. For those who fight, it warns that every secret will one day surface. And for those who listen, it affirms that no confession, however small, is ever meaningless. The Monschau bunker crumbled long ago. The forests grew back, reclaiming what men once built to outlast defeat. But beneath that soil, somewhere, the echoes remain. Of machines gone silent, of walls that once hummed with coded voices, and of a single man's choice to tell the truth when lies had already lost their purpose. In the end, history is not built from certainty, but from moments of clarity. And sometimes, one honest confession is enough to illuminate the darkness of an entire war.